let's get to Lamar, because at 4 Eastern time on Wednesday, that's when anybody can reach out to Lamar if they have 2 first-round selections to offer the Ravens, should the Ravens not match whatever contract they come up with Lamar Jackson. We have put together a list of teams that are quarterback needy, supposedly. It's now down to 7, and you know we have the Atlanta Falcons up there. I think we could remove them from this equation now, because they signed Taylor Heineke this morning, and the way that they signed Jesse Bates as safety yesterday, it's obvious that they're going to build around Desmond Ridder right now and go that way and give big money to other defensive players. The Washington Commanders might be off that board. Sherry Burris, who's new to NFL Network, reporting that she spoke to Ron Rivera on Monday, and Ron said absolutely they're not in the Lamar Jackson game. The Jets are about to be going Aaron Rodgers. What is Lamar's market as he hits this franchise tag free agency? Albert.
You have a really hard time I mean, you just said it, Rich. You have a really hard time going down that list and finding a team that you say, yeah, like absolutely, they're going to put in, they're going to push their chips to the middle of the table and see what happens. I don't know. I mean, I think I think Atlanta's probably the best example, right? Like, because I think what you're implicitly seeing from teams here is we want to wait for someone, and this is, I think, a few of the teams, and the Raiders are sort of in this boat. Like I said, the Falcons, I think the Panthers were there, then they moved up. It's like we're going to wait to find somebody that we really, really love, and until then, we're not going to spend huge money on a quarterback. I do think like what Daniel Jones and Derek Carr got scared teams a little bit, and so I think if you look at it, right, like it's like how many boxes do you have to check to be all in on Lamar Jackson? You have to be comfortable with his injury history. You have to be comfortable with a big contract. You have to be comfortable with flipping your offense upside down and running a different type of offense with him. You have to be comfortable with a lot of different things to get there. And then, you look at the big contracts last year, right? I think there were 5 like real big contracts like for quarterbacks last year. So you had Deshaun Watson in Cleveland. You had Russell Wilson in Denver. I'm probably going to miss one here. You had Derek Carr in Vegas.
Kyler in Arizona.
Kyler Murray in Arizona, and Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay. That's 5, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who's happy after a year?
I guess, who's happy in terms of what? The player or the organization?
Who's happy with their return right now? Like, I mean, I think that's a real thing, Like, the price has escalated to a point with quarterbacks where I think that there are some teams now that are pulling back and are saying, you know what, until we're really sure, until we find somebody that checks every single box for us, we're going to stay loose, and we think that going and Tampa, for example, Tampa's another one of these teams. We'll go get Baker Mayfield to compete with Kyle Trask, and you know what? We'll try to tread water and build up the roster everywhere else and spend our money everywhere else. We don't need to go spend $35 million a year on Derek Carr. You know what I mean? Like, so I think that's the environment that's working against Lamar Jackson right now, is that teams, I think, are a little less willing to take swings on quarterbacks, expensive swings on quarterbacks, because the price point has gotten to that point. And so I think to some degree, it's all the boxes you have to check to be all in on Lamar in the first place. But I think there's also, like this economic environment around the quarterbacks that's working against Lamar too. But I would say this, it can't hurt to place that phone call. You know what I mean? Like, if you're a team that isn't completely sold on his quarterback, why not at least make the phone call?
I know it just, but it doesn't.
The
question is who's going to make that phone call, and some of the other boxes that need to get checked that you didn't mention confuse, I think, a lot of fans because of how terrifically talented Lamar Jackson is.
Yep.
And the two of them, I spoke to Scott Pioli about this on NFL Network yesterday, is, well, we don't want to do the work for the Ravens by hammering out a deal that they couldn't negotiate for Lamar and do all the paperwork only to be left, empty-handed. And I said, well, what are you worried about? The billable hours for your legal staff? That makes no sense. Like, it's worth going for.
I guess the concern would be pissing off your quarterback, like if you have one.
Well, unless you're in Indianapolis, you don't have one. If you're Indianapolis, you do not have one. There's no quarterback to piss off. You
don't. But are you planning to draft one? You get the 4th overall pick. Are you planning to draft one? And then you look at it and say, well, we're going to come out of this with a quarterback at like $8 or $9 million a year. Do we really need to go spend $50 million on one? I think that's sort of part of the equation there. Like, I'll give you a good example. Let's have some fun with this, okay? And I don't want anybody sticking report : on front of this or whatever, right? But
okay.
let's say, look, New England wasn't completely happy with Mac Jones last year, right? Bill Belichick liked Lamar Jackson coming out. Now the question for them was whether or not we turn our operation upside down and build a new offense for him. You could say Bill would be building the Navy offense for him, right? Like,
yes.
If you really want to have fun with that.
Sure.
So like the issue that you have is, like, if you go and sign Lamar to an offer sheet and the Ravens match, where does that leave you with Mac Jones? Do you understand what I'm saying? So, like, I think some teams that have quarterbacks that might even be intrigued by it could look at it and say, if we do that, is that going to create a bigger problem for us in the back end of the Ravens match?
I get it. And it's also might be a process that drags on into late March, and you got to make your moves, certainly with free agency, and build your team. And if you're going to be building your team around a guy who is expensive as Lamar Jackson, when you have somebody on your first contract, a rookie contract, clearly that changes the entire dynamic of how you build your team. So I get that. The other box that people don't understand that needs to be checked is the fact that Lamar doesn't have an agent. And I just want to kind of dig into that real quick. Because when we hear he doesn't have an agent, you have to deal with his mom. It makes it sound like it's that Wedding Crasher scene where Lamar's in the basement screaming for meatloaf. You know what I mean? So how does it actually work? Like, is there nobody with a legal background or anybody who has sort of an agenting skill that's unofficially his agent? Like, is he really? You got to call his number or his mother's number to make a deal?
I mean,
is that it?
I can remember that. Like, it's interesting because that circle is very, very small, right? So I'm assuming like he would hire a lawyer to look over the thing. But I can remember this. I'll give you like an anecdote. Like, so I remember in 2018 when he was coming out, I remember hearing like A.B. Elam. You remember him for the Jets, right? Like, he advises a lot of players that have come out of South Florida, and I remember hearing, A.B. Elam's gonna work with him. And so I was like, okay, like, so I went to the combine, and actually, I wound up getting to Lamar by himself, and I was like, I wanted to ask him, like, hey, is A.B. Elam advising you? And he said no. He's like, I think he knew Abe, but he was like, no. And I think that's sort of, I mean, it's sort of like, to me, like looking back at that now 5 years later, it sort of crystallized like how tight the circle around him is. And, like, that's just the way Lamar, I think it's just, I mean, Lamar's so loyal to the people that he grew up around and everything else. Like, I think that's part of it. Now, I'd assume, like, look, like, you cannot sign a contract without hiring a lawyer to look at it, right? Like, so I think that's part of this. The NFLPA is also helping him, and that's part of it too. They have some people who are sort of the administrators that oversee the agents and everything else, and he has some help on that end also. But yeah, it's without question like a very untraditional thing, and I think that's part of it too. Is like if you're another team, you're going directly to Lamar with this, which creates a really, really interesting dynamic.
Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.